Hi, my name is, I'm the Weird Christian, and I'm Seek Truth, and I'm a Christian. And how does a Christian talk to a communist without getting into fights? I have done that. I can talk to a communist, and though they call me names at different times, still I try to redirect to real conversations, and I really get conversations. So it is really, these are the kind of things we have to be able to do, is to have a conversation. So today I'm going to be talking about how you can have a conversation with people that think completely different than you without having fights and arguments. And so that's the big idea here. So how can we talk to those who think differently from us? We need to be humble, and we should not believe that we need to win over those who think differently with arguments. We let them speak, and we attempt to understand them and repeat back what we have heard from them in their own words. And, I did that once. I was talking about how the fellow I was talking to thinks, but then he thinks that I'm agreeing with him. No, I'm just stating how they think. I'm aware. That does not mean that you agree with the person. It only means that you are listening and you know their arguments and you understand them. You will find that in repeating what you thought you heard, you usually misunderstand. Communication is not easy. And a lot of times certain people will resort to name calling and things like that. Calling you a racist, a fascist, a misogynist, so forth. But you don't reply with the same thing, just calling people names. Now, I have called him a racist because he tends to make every argument about race. To me, that's a definition of a racist. And then he will also take, a case in the newspaper and talk about somebody who's there and then label them as some kind of group. And then so he can smear the whole group that he wants to label as maybe that they're violent and so forth. So to me, that's being a bigot. That's basically a definition of a bigot. So there will be times when I do call him a racist and a bigot, but I use them not just name calling. I use them to describe things that are actually being done or an observation. And I think that's okay. It's okay to call a person a racist and a bigot if they're being racist and being being a bigot. If they're not, then if the argument's not about race or bigotry or anything like that, it's just an argument about how to spend money or something, I don't know, then you're not going to call them a racist or a bigot because they don't agree with you about money spending. You know what I mean? So, but the idea is to not be talking to them so that you're trying to put them down. I talk to them as a person, no matter how they treat me. They're a person. Now, sometimes a person, you have to decide whether if you're going to have a conversation, if they're going to be able to have a conversation with you. There's some people that they just will not have a conversation with you. Everything is so much the way that they see, and they'll say things about maybe other people or this or that logically don't make any sense. They're just labeling everybody the same. You have to decide whether the person you're talking to is worth talking to. And the communist that I talk to, I feel he is worth talking to. There was another person other people that you talk to, and they just can't seem to actually have a conversation at all. So you have to decide whether you can have a conversation, whether they're actually going to have anything, whether they will actually think about what you're saying. And because you'll say, this is what you're saying, and then they'll say, no, I'm not, I'm saying whatever. But anyway, so, but, and you know, a lot of times if you're, you have to, you know, like when you repeat what you thought that you heard, you may misunderstood. But if they keep going on their own record all the time, and you know, no matter what you're talking about, they just keep going back to their own thing, like like a record player, like a broken record. Then even if you're talking about something else, and they're still going back to that, then it's not really worth a conversation. But if they can understand and then they bring other ideas to the table, then you can address them, you know, and that's okay, you know. Anyway, you have to decide for yourself, because like later on in this thing I wrote that if a person you're listening to doesn't want to give you a chance to speak, or is not really listening to you back, don't expect to have a conversation with them. Politely say, thanks for your time, but I have other things to do. So, usually once they realize that you're really attempting to listen to them, they might become gracious and listen to what you have to say. And this is called a conversation. When people have this type of conversation, they learn to understand others' perspectives. You know, usually people avoid difficult topics. Subjects like religion and politics can turn into arguments and fights. And so we form cliques to have peace. Oh, that's a lot of times the reason why. It's just you don't want to talk to people that don't think differently than you. But people are upset in our space. But there's other people that just want to be in your space no matter what. And even some people that are in, you know, like in your clique might start believing other things. So some of your friends now might believe crazy things. They might believe silly, destructive things said by people on the fringe of knowledgeable society. How can one bring them back? And how can one talk to those who have lost their way without getting frustrated? So this is important. And also, sometimes we may be off believing a fringe thing. So we have to be aware of that also. We need a new way to communicate that can overcome arrogance and ignorance. As a Christian, I believe that Jesus gives us guidance in this new way. In the Beatitudes, Jesus states that the poor in spirit are blessed, for they will receive the kingdom of heaven. Okay, I'm going to talk about what poor in spirit means. But even more than that, in God's kingdom, conversation is edifying because people have the right attitude when talking on divisive subjects. The attitude is to be poor in spirit. One needs to be humble and listen. When one is willing to listen, one can learn new paradigms for understanding true reality. And if you're going to have a community, you have to be able to be humble enough to listen and to be caring enough about your person that you're talking to. These are things that's talking about being poor in spirit, not to be arrogant and rude and boastful, but be humble and to listen. And that's what the kingdom of heaven's about. I know other people think that it's about something else, but I'm just trying to understand the Bible and what it tries to say, and I believe that that's what it's saying. If there's more to this, but that's very important in this part. If the person you're listening to doesn't want to give you a chance to speak, don't expect to have a conversation with them. Politely say thanks for your time, but I have other things to do. But if you're going to have a conversation, if with conversations we can learn. Sometimes we have to ask questions to understand another, and during conversations, new ideas may appear that were not considered. Conversations may cause us to realize that we do not know, that we must search for deeper understanding. Many of us do not know why we do what we do or think what we think. It is a journey through this world. It's easy to journey through this world using our presumptions. To know who we are, we need to have conversations to find the axioms we live by. And axioms are basically the very basic fundamental things that keep us going in the day, wake up in the morning and so forth. The very fundamentals that drives us. These conversations need to question what we believe. We need fruitful conversations. This can only happen when we have a common goal and some common understanding. So it's very important to set up a common goal and common understanding to begin with, to have a conversation. Without these conversations, we will end up in condemnation or condemning other people rather than edification or helping other people. In ancient Greece, Socrates sought to engage in productive conversations. He did this by asking questions and teaching others to do so. The powerful in society did not share Socrates' common goal to find the best axioms to improve society. They were afraid of losing authority. Socrates was questioning the social order. As such, they stated he was acting seditiously against the establishment. How can enemies justify their condemnation of Socrates, who was esteemed by the community? They had to get Socrates to condemn himself to death for the conflict he was causing in questioning the order of society. And they got Socrates to admit that society is better off without him, since he caused conflicts by asking questions. So they got him to commit suicide so they wouldn't have to do it, because he was esteemed and they didn't want to have a judgment against them. Socrates questioned to understand. His motive was not to destroy the social order. He wanted to make society more robust and prosperous. This can only happen when the fundamentals of society's relationships are questioned. Questioning exposes the core. Now, questioning may cause you to realize that, or society to realize that maybe their fundamentals, the way they're doing things, needs to be changed. But that should be part of society, the idea that we can have change and it can make us better and stronger. And to just accept it rather than ignore it and keep our head in the sand. And then finally, like a tsunami, it comes and just wipes everything away because we're not really paying attention to what's really going on. So it's very important that society questions to figure out what's going on so that they can deal with the issues that need to be dealt with before a tsunami happens in their society and they just become wiped out and never exist anymore. And this has happened in the past. Communicating is difficult. Some consider asking questions a sin. Some theologies have that. Asking questions is a sin. And, different places. And you may even find in your own community and society that it's really frowned upon to ask questions. Questioning the given order makes one a heretic. People feel threatened when one questions their fundamental beliefs. So how does one question without threatening another? We need to create common ground. The goal of the conversation is to separate reality from fantasy so that we won't have a tsunami hit us of reality in the time in the future. The common belief that you have to establish is the search for truth and life. Asking why will connect belief and reality. Okay, what is belief? Belief is the lens through which we interpret reality. A truer understanding of reality comes when we question our beliefs. We need to determine whether our beliefs are working robustly as an interpretation of reality. Some will state that they don't believe in things. They are realists. They only see facts. Because of this, everything they say is true, because facts are true. To disagree with them is to argue against facts. And now I'm going to argue against facts. Mark Twain is quoted as saying, "There are lies, damned lies, and then there are statistics." This statement shows the lie's escalation. Statistics representing the worst lies are facts presented to state a narrative. What happens in statistics happens with all facts. Facts by themselves do not represent truth. A fact is not true just because it is declared a fact. All things need to be determined to be true. Truth is the lens needed to interpret facts and reality. Now, you have to get a good understanding of what truth is to make this lens work. If you have a poor definition of truth, then your lens will be kind of clouded. So I'm going to be talking about truth. In presenting facts is one cherry picking, using misleading scales, shifting definitions, or stating correlation is causation. Who is the source and what is the context? Authorities state that what they are saying is true, but is it? Every society builds its narrative for understanding reality. They all declare that what they say is fact. They claim that to disagree is to disagree with reality and truth. To disagree is to break society. Our age's definition of fact from those of other societies. So what's our age's definition of fact, and how does it differ from those of other societies? How do we know that what our age, what our time thinks is fact is true? I know it is hard to think that we should question our reality, our established knowledge base, and so forth. And I will start questioning your understanding of words like facts, knowledge, and truth. I'm going to start questioning even these things because it's very important to establish common words so that we are understanding what's going on. Because even that thing about saying I'm a realist, I don't believe in things, I'm just a realist. I think that the realist says that doesn't really understand the word what facts are, and they don't know what a belief is. So this is why you have to make some definitions and actually have to talk about these things like facts, knowledge, and truth. I know I sound like I'm condescending. I can't help it. I'm not saying jokes right now. I'm trying to give some ideas. But anyway, to state that a fact is true is to not understand what a fact is. As I mentioned before, you have to determine if a fact is true. You can't just state off a few things and say, oh, okay, you have to agree with what I said or else you're wrong. You're arguing with facts. Well, let's determine if the fact is true first. Without an interpretation, facts have no meaning. Let's look at the definition of fact. Now, I took this off of Google. Knowledge or information based on real occurrences. So right here with knowledge and information, you're talking about interpretation, interpreting real occurrences. So that's what a fact is. It's about knowledge and information, interpreting real occurrences. Something demonstrated to exist, to known, to have existed. And here's like genetic engineering is now a fact because they've determined that knowledge, interpretation of genes and even how to even see genes and so forth is true. So they continue to say it's a fact. So they have to interpret a lot of things. That Chaucer was a real person is an undisputed fact. Well, you have to determine that the writing of Chaucer and those who wrote about Chaucer are verifiably true. Then you can continue on to make it, or you could just state, Chaucer's or Santa Claus is a fact, like in a sense, Santa Claus would be a fact because he's turned into a commercial thing. What are you talking about when you're talking about Santa Claus? Are you talking about a person, that's ho jelly, or are you talking about a historical person like Saint Nicholas, who's a guy who actually lived in the history, but he's not the same guy that we think about the ho coming down chimney stuff. So you have to define these kind of things to figure out what's really going on. It says a real occurrence, an event. Okay. Well, that's true, but that's not an interpretation. This is the one that says a real occurrence, an event. Like the sun is up, the sky is blue. Those are kind of facts, I guess. But when you actually try to say what's going on in that, why is the sky blue? Then you're starting to interpret things. A paraphrase of the definition is, and I think this is a pretty good paraphrase that I made, a fact is an interpretation using knowledge to understand an event. And some people, because you have to find out if the interpretation is true or not. It can be a fact that is not true, or a fact that is true, or a fact it could be just a statement somebody's made, whatever. Am I bending the definition to suit my argument? I believe not. If facts are only an event, then any interpretation of an event is not to be included in the observation. So, if for example, the sun appearing on the horizon in the morning. Now, that's all you're talking about. Okay, well, how did it get there? Now we're starting to talk about interpretations. Okay, we could use Newtonian physics and figure out the orbits, and that would be an interpretation about how it got there. And it could be true, if it works as truth. What is truth? We haven't got to that yet. Or it could be, somebody could say the sun god did it, and that could be true, depending on your society that you are living in. Okay, so one could be in our society, it could be Newtonian physics, and that's why it's up there. And another society, as far as it goes, and another society could be a sun god moving the sun across the sky, and that would also be considered a fact in that society. Because that's what their narrative of knowledge is. So they're just using their narrative of knowledge and the reasoning with that to make it work. Some argue that each interpretation is as valid as the other. And there are people that say, a simple God definition like this is as valid as the Newtonian physics, even in today's world. In fact, we're getting much into that. Because in today's statements, I can have my truth and you can have your truth. But when you do that, basically, you have circular arguments. Everybody's just, I state my truth, and my truth is true because I've stated it, basically. And that's a circular argument. And if you use just circular arguments, then basically you destroy all reason and you destroy science and governance and all sorts of stuff that we have. But what is true? Is truth a knowledge narrative? It says truth, conforming to fact or actuality. Does this story have any truth? So right here we're talking about a narrative, and then we're deciding whether it has truth. But it doesn't really say what truth is at this point. Reality, actuality. Okay, your reality, you have your perspective, I have mine. Does that mean it's true? So, in truth, he was not qualified for the job. Well, it depends who thinks the qualifications are. Is it based on merit or is it based on numbers? Like, we have to have a certain number of people. Like, what is the truth? And what is truth? We're going to get to that. The reality of a situation. The truth is she respects your work. Okay, so that's another interpretation. She's doing an interpretation to respect your work. It's all about interpretations in this definition. Which, is that wrong? I think truth does have an interpretation, but what are we using for that interpretation? How do we make that interpretation? Does truth conform with facts? I've already argued that a fact is a knowledge-interpreted event. Depending on a culture's knowledge, this fact yields a different interpretation of reality. The interpretation confirms the observation, and the observation confirms the interpretation. That's what we're using a lot these days. This is circular reasoning. To break out of this recursive crash in logic, because even if you're writing computer programs, if you do start doing this stuff, interpreting confirms the observation, and the observation confirms the interpretation, as soon as you get into there, you get in a loop, and then things just stop. And nothing gets done. The interpretation needs to be questions for inconsistencies. Truth must be defined so that it does not depend on interpretation of cultural knowledge to understand reality. And this is a hard one because we all have our cultures and we all want to say that they are valid. But if we just rely on that, we get into this circular reasoning. If we can't actually question our culture, we basically say our culture is true and it tells us what the observations are. So therefore the observations are true because they confirm our culture. And so we're just going around in circles in our little bubble of not knowing what's really going on. And that's how we define truth. So our truth has kind of stuck us into this loop of not knowing anything, really. We're just going in circles. The definition of truth we need, it should be concise rather than vague and convoluted like the one we have now. And I'll give you what I figure out is a good definition of truth that will get you out of circular reasoning. Truth is the search for reality. So when it's a search, once you find out that you're in circular reason, you can break out of it because you're just searching. You're not just declaring truth. You're searching for it. If you're declaring truth, you're saying, okay, I declare truth and it's true because I declared it. Okay, once you're in that loop, you're not finding out truth. You're just confirming your own biases. But if truth is the search for reality, that means it can change when you're actually searching for something. It's a search for reality, grounded in three premises. Is the proposition consistent? Is it everywhere, omnipresent? And is it eternal? Okay, I'm just going to help you understand these words here. Omnipresent only means everywhere. It does not mean God. And eternal in the biblical sense, okay, means in all ages. Ages are definable. Therefore, an age could be defined as being without time, space, matter, or energy. So that could be an age. So eternity has all the ages, which are definable things. You can't really even say period, because here's an age without a period, because it doesn't have time. This definition eliminates the argument that one group has their truth versus another's knowledge base of truth. The knowledge base would have to be to fulfill all premises to be considered a truth statement. Knowledge, the state or fact of knowing. Humans naturally aspire to knowledge, which is an interpretation. They see patterns in nature, and that is what knowledge is made out of. Familiarity, awareness, or understanding gained through experience or study. Has great knowledge of these parts, has only limited knowledge of chemistry. So here it's showing that knowledge can be partly known, and I think that's a very important concept, that we don't know everything. The sum or range of what has been perceived, discovered, or learned. So these are good definitions. So knowledge is an interpretation based on experience. Basically, that's my paraphrase of what's going on here in the definitions that I got off Google, which are common definitions. How does one build their interpretation? So the biggest thing is, how do you build your interpretation? They usually build this interpretation on the culture they grew up in. Okay. To understand our interpretation of events, we must understand our culture. And what is our culture? Some will state we have a post-Christian culture. But these only state where our culture has been. They do not state where we are, nor do they state what our culture is transforming into. If our culture was Christian, currently educational institutions do not support the culture that established them. And those currently in charge of these institutions usually do not present the culture they are using to replace the original culture, though some are vaguely aware of it. Okay, I'm going to just set up a tree of understanding so that you can understand what I'm saying better. Fundamentally, theologies, which are talks of God, underline various ideologies. So you can have one type of God, but it can have various ideologies that work underneath that one type of God. And theologies create ideological trees that interpret reality in much the same way, though with variation. So you can make a tree based on a God has different ideologies. Okay, there is an ideology which Marxism and socialism use. They both have different ideologies, but the theology they use dates back, which is based on the main God that is used in Marxism and socialism, has a certain theology that they use to make these ideologies. And this theology dates back before ancient Greece. Others have demonstrated the historical river of thought leading to Marxism and socialism. It is a study, and I will not attempt to explain it here. There's a fellow on YouTube who makes a good channel that gives a good place to start understanding and finding the resources to understand the way theologies and ideologies are linking up. His is Tick History, and you can go to that. You can learn something there. But we will not go there. Instead, I will focus on determining whether our interpretation of facts are true. I will present my understanding, and I will make some assumptions. I think they are reasonable, but you may not. Disagreement is the nature of the beast we are tackling. So I'm going to present a couple of gods that are used and how we use them to make our ideologies in our society. I will present an ancient method for interpreting facts. And this is easy. I think everybody agrees with this method. Facts were interpreted using gods. Historically. The reason the sun rose in the sky was the sun god, or something else, some other god like that. And for every event, a god was involved. Understanding nature meant knowing the gods. Our society states that we use reason to understand observations. We state this to mean reason is knowledge above the use of gods. We think the ancients did not use reason because they relied on gods, but they used reason also. Okay, here it is important. The process of reasoning involves using culturally established premises. So it's your culture which establishes premises to formulate narratives that explains events. So in order to use reason, you have to have some premises. And then you start using reason to formulate narratives. So that's what we do. We use culturally established premises. And then we use reason to formulate the narratives. And they've always done this, even in the ancient times. Even when they were just sitting around a campfire back in the day. They would have culturally established premises, and they would use their reasoning to formulate narratives. It's no different now. To understand the narratives of the observation, it is necessary to know one's culture and its axioms. And when you start figuring out the axioms, you start figuring out the theology of what you're believing. Historically, all cultures use gods to formulate their narratives. I believe that even in today's scientific world, we still use gods. We just do not recognize them as gods. We need to understand the purpose of gods. Gods are used to understand how to relate to the world of the living and the dead, the spiritual and the material. The study of gods is called theology. As I mentioned before about theology. So once we understand the theology of the gods, we can determine the premises we will use to create narratives to help us understand the world we live in. To make this discussion clear, I will present two cases of obvious gods in our current society, though you may not be aware of them, that oppose one another in their theologies, scientific theories, language use, and governments. These gods have very different theologies, scientific theories, language use, and governance. But we're using them right now, and you can see it all the time. The theology used in science becomes apparent when discussing things which are beyond the observable. Okay? And sometimes, we'll make models to explain things, but they're not really observed. But you can see the theology used in the models that we make to understand the world. That's just another thing, like climate change. Once one grasps the concepts, one can find the use of these different gods in other scientific declarations and fields of knowledge, like law and governance and science, whatever. Belief creates the theories. So belief creates the theories. So what you believe will create the theories. One is the Gnostic God. Now, you may have never heard of a Gnostic God, but I'll tell you, this Gnostic God or Gnostic theology is very apparent in our society. This God is infinite in nature and has no beginning or ending. The God is a form of this God. The universe is the form of this God. Because this God is infinite in nature, logically it is concluded that this God is the universe. And maybe more than the universe, but definitely the universe, everything in the universe. This God being infinite means it has no boundaries. It is everything. It's in everything. Concludes that the universe is also infinite, having no beginning or end. However, it may have cycles of expansion and contraction. So in theories of the beginning of the universe, they'll have this expansion and contraction and different things like that in their theories, though you can't observe any of that. Theories of the multiverses are derived from the premises of this God. So the comic book series, Avengers and DC Comics, they use the multiverses all the time. It really makes it fun to make stories and narratives, very complex ones. All are within this God. Therefore, individuality does not really exist. We're just kind of imaginations of the God. So we really aren't doing anything. We're just his imagination. We don't have any agency. And we don't have any individuality. We just do what we are to do. Nothing has agency. All things are fated. This narrative on agency has more to do with governance. So the agency thing, governance for in our time, but basically you just do what the authority tells you to do. That's this God. And it's just God's will that things happen. Just is. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can even hear in our language. Anyway, the biblical God defines himself as being at the beginning and at the end of the universe. The universe is finite in duration, and it is not God. This God created the universe at a starting point, at a starting time for a purpose. And this universe has distinct limits declared from things within it. So, like the Big Bang Theory is very much kind of a thing that supports the biblical God idea. Though you'll have a lot of, controversy on that. In governance, this God is limited by words used to create the universe. So the God is limited by the words, and God is the words, actually. These words establish the functions and relationships of this God with all things in the universe. So words are really important to this God. Covenants and agreements and words. The words are pillars holding up the structures of the universe. In this other one, words can just be messed around. In the Gnostic God, you're not really worried about definitions as much. You just basically get everybody out of the idea of thinking and just use emotions for your arguments. So that's kind of how they do language with the Gnostic God. In the biblical God, words are really important. You're a stickler for definitions so that people can understand what you're saying. The God establishes the existence of all and gives agency and responsibility to the living. What do you think of this? Well, do you think this explanation is valid? So, think about it. Is it valid? Make a comment about it. Do you think I'm off on La La Land, or maybe you don't like the way I said things, or I'm not pretty face or anything? I know that. But anyway, I'm not doing a comedic thing. Comedy is fun. And I'm just wondering if this will help you understand the world, yourself and the world around you. I hope it does. After reading this, you will know what I think. Hopefully this will equip you with the knowledge to have an edifying conversations with me and others who think differently. Because, yeah, in this world, we need to be able to have conversations with people that think differently and not just try to jail them or whatever or threaten them. And we don't want to, you shouldn't threaten people. You need to have a conversation so we can have some understanding, so we can work and live together peacefully and have not destructive. I forgot these things here. Like here, I'm a Christian, and then here's the Gnostic. You see how it's got the infinity snake thing in it? That's infinity, and it's a snake, but this idea of infinite. There's no real borders, and everything runs into another. That's Gnosticism. This is the Gnostic snake. And here's the in the beginning, the heaven and the earth and all that. And I wonder, it's interesting, if you read the Bible, in the beginning, or when God started doing stuff, the earth was without form and void and chaotic, basically. And then he had to start saying things to try to get it fixed up, like there's earth, there's light, and there's dark, and then you can have a days, and then there's water and land, and so you have the separation of that and so forth, and and different lights in the sky and animals and all that. So it was a real fixer-upper, because right at the beginning it was kind of a mess. And a lot of times our life is a mess. We might have bought a house and or got a house, and it was a disaster that we bought. A hoarder's house. We got a good deal on it. Then we had to put some order and stuff and clean up things, divide things, the good and the bad, what we wanted to keep and what we wanted to get rid of, and so forth. And so in a sense, God, when he was looking for some real estate, the universe, I guess, and he had a real fixer-upper here. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in, just kind of a silly joke. My wife said it was kind of blasphemous, but anyway, I just thought of it. But you have a good day, and may God bless you and give you peace. And thank you for listening. And if you have any comments, give a comment. God bless you, and may you be blessed. Amen.